Hello friends, welcome to Premier UPSC IAS. So continuing with the lecture 2 of the modern history important notes for prelims examination. Let's begin. So today we are going to discuss from the advent of the Europeans. We have discussed the arrival of the Portuguese in the previous class. Here we shall discuss the arrival of the next three European powers such as Dutch, English and French. Arrival of the Dutch. United East India Company of the Netherlands was formed in 1602 with permission from the Dutch government to trade in the East Indies including India. They set up their first factory in Masulipatam in Andhra Pradesh. So first factory of the Dutch in Masulipatam, now it is called as Machilipatnam in Andhra Pradesh in 1605. Subsequently spread to other parts of India as well. They conquered the Ceylon, that is Sri Lanka, from the Portuguese in 1656 and other Portuguese ports on the Malabar coast in 1671. They became a potent force after capturing the Nagapattinam near modern-day Chennai from the Portuguese, thereby establishing their foothold in South India. They monopolized trade in black pepper and spices, and they also traded in cotton, indigo, silk, rice, and opium. Monopolization of trade in black pepper and spices is important. Their presence in the Indian subcontinent lasted till 1825. The coming of the British posed a serious challenge to the commercial interest of the Dutch. They were constantly involved in warfare. Britishers emerged clear winners owing to huge resources at their disposal. The Travancore king Martandavarma also defeated the Dutch East India Company in the Battle of Colachal in 1741. Battle of Colachal is very important. It led to complete rout of Dutch power in the Malabar region. The British and the Dutch came to a compromise in 1667 on the basis of give and take formula. British agreed to completely withdraw from Indonesia for the Dutch, who in turn retired from India to trade in Indonesia. Treaties called the Anglo-Dutch Treaties were signed in 1814 and 1824, which facilitated the return of the Bengal and the Coromandel territories to the British regime. All transfers of property and establishments were done by 1825 and they had to forfeit all trading posts in India. Moving forward, Danish in India. Danish people came from Denmark, Dutch people came from Netherlands and held their colonial possessions in India for 225 years. The Dutch adventurer Marcellus de Boschuwer wanted military assistance against the Portuguese and promised of monopoly on all trades to the assisting party. This convinced the Christian IV, the King of Denmark-Norway, who issued a charter in 1616 granting the Danish East India Company a monopoly on trade between Denmark and Asia for 12 years. Their colonies in India included the towns of Tranquebar in Tamil Nadu, Serampore in West Bengal, and Nicobar Islands. So the colonies of Danish in India could be a question. This is important. Tranquebar in Tamil Nadu, Serampore in West Bengal, and Nicobar Islands. Moving forward, the Serampore Mission Press was established by Danish missionaries in 1799, which is a historical landmark. It printed 212,000 copies of books in 40 different languages between 1801 to 1832. The British invaded and devastated the Danish East India Company's India trade in the Napoleonic Wars. They ultimately captured Danish colonies and the last Danish colonial post at Serampore was ceded to Britain by Denmark in 1845 AD. Moving forward, arrival of the British. The arrival of the British was the outcome of the Portuguese traders who were earning huge. The arrival of the British was the outcome of Portuguese traders. This is important. This tempted them to form an English East India Company in 1599. They received a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I on December 31, 1680, giving it the monopoly to trade in the East. This company is sometimes referred to as John Company. It was a joint stock company established as the Company of Merchants of London. trading into the East Indies. This is very important, you should remember this one. Queen herself had a share in the East India Company. Early years of British. In 1608, the company sent Captain William Hawkins to Jahangir's court to secure the royal patronage. This is also very important pertaining to the prelims questions. A royal permit was given to the company to establish factories at Surat and other places in India, such as Masuripatnam. So, such a royal permit to the Britishers in the early years were given by Jahangir. Not satisfied by the given concessions, Sir Thomas Roe was sent by Emperor James I of England to Jahangir's court in 1615 again. He was very diplomatic and thus successfully secured a royal charter giving the company freedom to trade in the whole of the Mughal territory. This is also very important. In 1639, the city of Madras was obtained on lease from the local king. The company built Fort St. George to protect its factory, and subsequently Madras became the South Indian headquarters of the company by 1639. In 1662, Charles II of England received Bombay as dowry for marrying the Portuguese Princess Catherine. It was given to the East India Company in 1668 for £10 per year. This turned out to be one of the decisive moments for the company. It shifted its business headquarters from Surat to Bombay. The company now started to focus on the East, particularly Bengal. So you have to remember how they first came towards the south and slowly they shifted towards the Mumbai. After Mumbai, they are focusing on Bengal. The governor of Bengal at the time was Shujauddaulah. He allowed the English to carry out its trade activities in Bengal in 1651. Subsequently, they set up the factory in Hooghly. In 1698, they were granted revenue over three villages, Sutanuti, Govindapur, and Kalikata. Important, unexpected question from here. They built the Fort William to provide protection around the factory. Arrival of the French. The French were the last to arrive on Indian shores. They set up French East India Company in 1664 during the reign of King Louis XIV to trade with India. The French set up their first factory at Surat in 1668 and 1669. They established another French factory at Masulipatam. You can see how Masulipatam is a focus point for all the Dutch, the French, and the Britishers. Subsequently, in 1673, the Mughal Subedar of Bengal granted the permission to the French to set up township at Chandarnagar. They obtained a village called Pondicherry from Sultan in Bijapur in 1674, which later became the main stronghold of the French in India. Moving forward, they also developed their trade bastions at the following places: Mahe, Karaikal, Balasore, and Qasim Bazar. It's important. A very important question can be expected from here. The objectives of the French were purely commercial from their arrival until 1741, like those of the British. As time passed, they began to consider India as their colony. Dupleix. Joseph Francois Dupleix came as the governor of French East India Company in 1741 AD, under whom the political motives began to surface. Dupleix was tactful, leader, and diplomatic general. He took advantage of the rivalries among the local rulers and used them to establish a French empire in India. But he faced a serious challenge from the British, and subsequently both powers had a face-off, resulting in the so-called Carnatic Wars. So Carnatic Wars is the face-off between the British and the French. The commercial and the maritime rivalry between the Anglo-French took the form of three Carnatic Wars, both the commercial and the maritime rivalry. They were named so because the wars fought for the supremacy over the Carnatic region of the South India in the 18th century. So the name Carnatic Wars because the region where they fought were the Carnatic region. South India in this period was divided into minor Rajas, Nawabs, and petty chieftains who fought with each other. The British and French took sides to support one of these rivals and increase their own dominance. To establish their supremacies, it was necessary for either French or British to eliminate the other from this region. The wars finally resulted in the political supremacy of the British, and the French were reduced to the areas around Pondicherry only. First Carnatic War, 1745 to 48, supremacy of English, Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle. Second Carnatic War, 1749 to 54, supremacy of English, Treaty of Pondicherry. Third Carnatic War, 1758 to 63, English as sole power in India, the Treaty of Paris. Moving forward, let's discuss First Carnatic War. Entire Europe was engaged in the War of Austrian Succession in 1740 with Prussia, Spain, France, Sweden, etc. on one side and Habsburg monarchy, England, Dutch Republic and Russia on the other. Thus emerged a contest between the French and the British East India Company forces in India also. So here is the point how the international geopolitics also had the influence about the geopolitical changes happening in India at those times. The conflict began with British fleet capturing the French ships on the Coromandel coast. The Nawab of Arcot, Anwaruddin Khan, rejected the request for interference from the French governor of the time, Dupleix. So French used their backup forces from Mauritius. They attacked British, captured Madras, and imprisoned the British company's servants, including Robert Clive. Nawab of Arcot attempted to recapture Madras from the French and sent troops to Fort St. George. The forces of the Nawab were defeated by the French. As the negotiations were going on about the fate of Madras, Robert Clive escaped out of the prison and moved to the British post at Cuddalore, or Fort St. David. The British forces saved Cuddalore from the French. The war in Europe ended in 1748 with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, and this also restored the peace between the France and England. Madras was restored to the English in exchange for some territory such as Louisburg in North America. This is also an important point pertaining to the prelims questions. Moving forward, Second Carnatic War. The First Carnatic War gave rise to a proxy war between British and French forces in India. A victory over Nawab of Arcot in the First War established the supremacy of Dupleix and he looked to expand his influence in South India, that is French. When the Nizam of Hyderabad Asaf Jah died and a war of succession broke out in Hyderabad, there was also trouble in Arcot as well. This gave an opportunity to Dupleix. Dupleix supported Nizam's grandson Muzaffar Jung for Hyderabad and Chanda Sahib for Arcot. French Muzaffar Jung and Chanda Sahib developed a tripartite force. This is important. The tripartite force for Second Carnatic War could be a question here. To counter Dupleix, the British pledged support to Nasir Jung for Hyderabad and Muhammad Ali for Arcot. The French tripartite attacked and killed Nawab Anwaruddin of Arcot, and his son Muhammad Ali fled to Trichinopoli. Even Nasir Jung was killed by French. However, soon British retaliated and Muzaffar Jung was killed. The French were quickly put to support Salabat Jung on the throne and maintained French influence on Hyderabad for several years. The Nizam of Hyderabad in return gave the French four rich districts of the Coromandel coast called the Northern Circus. This is very important. A potent question could be expected here pertaining to prelims. This alarmed the British and realized there was a serious threat to their existence. Robert Clive suggested attacking Arcot as French were concentrating on Hyderabad. They successfully captured Arcot and executed Chanda Sahib. Muhammad Ali was made the Nawab of Arcot. This siege of Arcot in 1751 was a heroic feat and made Robert Clive a national hero in England. The Second Carnatic War was an unofficial war between the two companies as both France and England were at peace in Europe. After the war, the respective companies were denounced by both countries. The French recalled Dupleix to France and was replaced by Gundehu. A Treaty of Pondicherry was signed in 1755 by Gundehu. Both the countries agreed not to interfere in the quarrels of the Indian rulers. British maintained a strong hold in Carnatic and the French in Hyderabad for some time, but the French prestige had gone down heavily. Moving forward, Third Carnatic War. A 7 years war broke out in Europe in 1756 and this renewed the conflict between the France and England back in India. The Third Carnatic War in India was a coterminous with it, was a local version of 7 years war in Europe. The British forces captured the French settlements at the Chandernagore in 1757. The French forces, led by Thomas Arthur, Comte de Lally, faced off with the British forces led by Sir Eyre Coote. The British defeated the French in the Battle of Vandewash in 1760 and acquired Pondicherry in 1761. So you should remember different Carnatic wars, their age, who won the treaties, and who were the responsible. For example, Robert Clive during the Second Carnatic War and Thomas Arthur during the Third Carnatic War. The 7 years war and hence the Third Carnatic War concluded with the signing of the Treaty of the Paris in 1763. The Treaty of Paris returned the territories of Chandernagore and Pondicherry to France. Though the treaty allowed the French to have trading posts in India, but forbade the French traders from administering them. This ended the French ambitions of an Indian empire and they remained restricted to Pondicherry. Finally, the British became the sole European power in India. Moving forward, causes for the failure of French in India. Better finances of the British. The trade by the English was as much as 4 times greater than the French company between 1736 to 1756. So finances were the reason. Private enterprise versus the government enterprise. English East India Company was a private enterprise and were self-reliant. The French company, however, completely dependent on government. Naval supremacy of the British. British were able to send help whenever required and also helped them to cut the link between French possessions in India and France. The British also had a naval base in Bombay, while French naval base in Mauritius in France and prevented speedy action. Battle settlements of the British. Calcutta, Bombay and Madras were main settlements of the British with capital in Calcutta. The most important French settlement was Pondicherry and their entry point to mainland India was Deccan. Bengal was much more prosperous than Deccan. Returning of Dupleix. After the Second Carnatic War, the French recalled Dupleix, which proved to be a costly mistake as it created a vacuum which couldn't be filled by his successors. Comte de Lally lacked the foresight and statesmanship of Dupleix, and he departed from Hyderabad, ending the French influence there. Thus, Nizam Salawat Jung allied himself with English and gave northern succors to the English. Moving forward, British occupation of Bengal. The occupation of Bengal was the first major conflict of the British against the Indian power. The background of such a major conflict was the English East India Company was given a royal farman in 1717 AD by the Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyar. He granted the company the freedom to export and import goods from and to Bengal without paying taxes. It also gave them the right to issue dastaks for the movement of such goods. The company servants, however, had to pay the same taxes as Indian merchants for carrying out the trade. But the servants misused the power of issue dastaks for the company's goods, which caused loss to the royal treasury. Sirajuddaula succeeded Alivardi Khan as the Nawab of Bengal in 1756. There was already a conflict going between the Nawabs because of the misuse of the trade privileges by the company and its officers. The hot-tempered Siraj asked the company to trade as per the same rules and regulations as in the times of the Murshid Quli Khan and rejected the Farman. Black hole tragedy. This is very important. The British refused and in turn levied heavy duty on Indian goods entering Calcutta, which greatly annoyed the Nawab. The company was also fortifying their factories to prevent a French attack at the time. The Nawab ordered them to demolish fortifications. The British didn't obey the orders, which resulted in Siraj-ud-Dawla invading Qasim Bazar and captured Fort William in Calcutta in 1756 AD. He seized the fort with people inside and arrested several British officials, and many died. This event was called the Black Hole Tragedy of Calcutta. Battle of Plassey. The news of fall of Calcutta reached Madras, and the British responded by sending an expedition of forces under Robert Clive to save the fort. The British started hatching a conspiracy against the Nawab by allying with his officers like Rai Durlab, Ami Chand, Mir Jafar, and Jagat Seth. Mir Jafar, who was the general of the Nawab army, was promised of the Nawabship by Robert Clive for his support to the English. On June 23, 1757, the Nawab's army, which consisted of about 40,000 soldiers with elephants, over 50 cannons, and 50 French artillerymen, they engaged in the heavy and the continuous fire for 3 hours, but the British army retreated to re-strategize. There was heavy rain during the retreat. While the British took precaution to protect their ammunition, the Nawab's army failed to do so. Rains reduced the effectiveness of the Nawab's weapons, and then one of the wings of the Nawab's army under the Mir Jafar didn't respond because Mir Jafar had already allied with British secretly. The Nawab army had to retreat, but the British entered their camp. Thus, it was not the military power that helped the English win the battle, but the conspiracy by Mir Jafar. Siraj-ud-Dawla was killed by Mir Jafar's son Miran. Mir Jafar was supported as the Nawab. They signed a treaty with Mir Jafar and were given the right to free trade in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, now Odisha. He also had to pay them 1,77,000 to the company. Actually, 1 crore 77 lakhs to the company and large sums to the company officers as the bribe. However, the new Nawab could not meet the ever increasing demands of the English. They were also suspicious about Mir Jafar's collaboration with the Dutch trading company. So they disposed him as Nawab and made his son-in-law Mir Qasim the new Nawab. In return, he gave them the districts of Burdwan, Midnapur, and Chittagong for the expenses of the British army. Battle of Buxar. This proved to be of great help to the British as it supported them to finance their campaign against the French at Vandebosch. Mir Qasim succeeded as a better administrator, and he came into conflict with the British in Bengal over the duty-free private trade of the company. He proposed a plan to share trade duties equally for the British and Indian traders. It was turned down by the British consul at Calcutta. Mir Qasim, however, remitted all duties on Indians and the British alike, which deprived the privilege of the British private traders. They could not compete with Indian traders on equal terms. The Nawab also attempted to reorganize the army and was looking to shift the capital from Murshidabad to Mongir. The British took offense with the Nawab's steps, and in June 1763, under Major Adams, they defeated Mir Qasim. Mir Qasim fled to Patna, and the chief of the company's factory at Patna tried to seize the city. Mir Qasim then formed an alliance with the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II and Shujauddaulah, the Nawab of Awadh. The Confederates marched towards Patna, and the battle was fought at Buxar on October 22, 1764. So, battle was fought between the Nawab of Awadh, Shujauddaulah, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, and the fled Mir Qasim against the British. It came to be the most important turning point in Indian history. A decisive victory of the Battle of Buxar resulted in Shah Alam II coming to terms with British. Lord Clive concluded a treaty of Allahabad with Shujauddaulah, Nawab Wazir of Awadh. He had to pay 50 lakhs of rupees for the expenses of the war and was given back his dominions. He signed a defensive alliance with Company, and Awadh was made a buffered state by the British and appointed a resident in the state. Tara and Allahabad and Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa were granted to them in return for a regular annual payment of 26 lakh rupees. Mir Jafar was again made the Nawab of Bengal, and after his death, his son was installed as the Nawab. The company and its officials made huge personal profits by exporting money from the Nawab and themselves came to be called the Nabobs, a distorted version of the Nawab. By 1765, thus the annexation of Bengal was complete and the British had become the virtual rulers of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. The Nawab of Awadh and the Nawab of Carnatic were now dependent rulers. Dual system of administration in Bengal. The company ruled in Bengal followed the administrative system under the Mughals. In the early days, that is, the administration was divided into two heads, Nizamat and the Diwani. Nizamat referred to administration of law and order and criminal justice, whereas the Diwani referred to the revenue administration and civil justice. The Nazim was in charge of the Nizamat and the Diwan was in the charge of the revenue administration. The Treaty of Allahabad made the company the Diwan of Bengal, but Clive chose not to take over the administration of Bengal. The responsibility of administration was left to the Nawabs Naib Diwan and Naib Nazim. Thus, the Nawab had to handle the entire responsibility for the civil and criminal justice administration. However, the company directly collected its revenue as the Diwan. This arrangement came to be known as the dual or double government. The British had power and resources without responsibility, while the Nawab had the responsibility of the administration without any resources to discharge it. Tools of expansion. The British followed several tools in shifting their role from a trading corporation to become a supreme political power in India. Extensively used main three tools were the following: policy of ring fence, subsidiary alliance, and doctrine of lapse. Policy of ring fence. At first, they followed a policy of ring fence between 1757 to 1813 as they were not strong enough to directly interfere in the internal affairs of the Indian states. Warren Hastings was the one who generally followed the policy of ring fence. Instead of retaining the conquered territories of Awadh, he gave them back to the Nawab. In the first Anglo-Maratha, the status quo was restored by the Treaty of Salbai, and the Anglo-Mysore Wars benefited the allies Marathas and the Nizam more than the British themselves in the short term. Subsidiary alliance. The second method of a subsidiary alliance system was mostly used by Lord Wellesley, who was the Governor General. It was a non-intervention policy, an extension of the previous policy of the ring fence. It was signed between the British and the local rulers, and this created what came to be called the princely states in the later years. Under this system, the British were to protect the Indian rulers against the external threats and internal disorder. In return, the Indian rulers had to pay money to the British for stationing a contingent. The ruler was prohibited from entering into an alliance with any other powers and also couldn't fight a war without prior permission from the British. A British resident was stationed at these ruling stations as a liaison between the company and the ruler. Advantages. The subsidiary alliance was a great advantage to the British in the expansion of the empire as it allowed them to build and maintain large forces without even spending a single penny. It also helped them weed out the foreign influence from the Indian courts. Nizam of Hyderabad was the first one to sign a subsidiary alliance agreement in 1798. As a part of the agreement, he replaced the French officers from his court and put English officers. The territories of Bellary and Kadapa were granted to the British for the maintenance of army. Mysore became the second state in 1799 to get into the subsidiary alliance. Soon Tanjore in 1799, the Nawab of Awadh in 1801, Peshwa Bajirao II in 1802, Bhonsle, Scindia and Gaikwads in 1803 also accepted the terms of the policy. Holkar's were the last of the Maratha Confederation to accept the terms of the subsidiary alliance. Doctrine of Lapse. Doctrine of Lapse, an annexation policy to expand the realm of the British Kingdom in India, was devised by Dalhousie, the Governor General between 1848 and 1856. He used it to bring the independent Indian states into British rule. According to the policy, the state under the direct influence of the British East India Company or as a vassal state under the British subsidiary system would get lapsed the right to rule if the ruler was either incompetent or died without a natural male heir. Adoption of a child was not accepted, and they also took over the authority of deciding the competence of the Indian rulers. Under the policy, the company annexed the princely states such as Satara, Jaipur, Sambalpur, Udaipur, Jhansi, and Nagpur. This is an important point, and a question can be expected from here. However, was annexed in 1856 on the grounds that the native ruler was incompetent and indifferent to the welfare of his subjects. Advantages. The policy of Lapse enabled the company to establish absolute administrative control over many regions spread over the subcontinent. However, it made the British extremely unpopular and it ended up becoming one of the most important reasons for the 1857 revolt. Thank you.